When you go to the bank to get a loan for a house, a car, or your kid's tuition, the bank lends you the money. Then they package your loan with a bunch of others into a bond that they sell to investors. This bond is what is called a security. Investors buy these because they pay a steady stream of cash while people slowly pay off those loans. When the bank sells these securities, it gets a large amount of money up front, which it can use to make more loans. This process goes on for a long while. But one day, when you need another loan, you go back to the bank. But this time there is no money to lend, because the global financial system has turned upside down, and the market for securitization, the process of packaging loans into bonds and freeing up more cash for lending, has fallen off a cliff. Securitization is what has caused most of the problem that the banks, governments, and all of us are having to deal with today. When this process was developed 30 years ago, it was a true breakthrough. Lenders no longer had to wait to be paid back before making additional loans, and were able to more quickly put more capital into the economy, thereby driving growth. We are now suffering a financial Chernobyl, and securitization is radioactive. In 2008, the dollar value of all kinds of such securities dropped drastically. Most of this loss of value was caused by the increase of non-performing loans, or loans that borrowers stopped paying, because they couldn't pay the higher rates of interest that kicked in a few years after they took out the loans. Or they did not feel obliged to pay for a loan whose total amount suddenly exceeded their home value due to the collapse of the housing market. When lax underwriting standards and borrowed money on top of borrowed money finally caught up with the world, the pyramid-style system collapsed. This is hardly the first time problems have surfaced with securitizations. Over the past 30 years, there have been any number of small explosions, often eerily similar in cause. In the 1990s, for example, as so-called non-bank banks started issuing credit cards, the new competition drove many players to court borrowers with less than pristine credit histories. Teaser rates and no-fee cards drew in people who were more likely to default, and they did. The value of securitizations built on top of those loans faltered. Credit moves in cycles. Lending becomes plentiful, and then it retracts. The process reboots. Securitization amplifies the effect, an advantage in good times, since loans are economic fuel. But then the bad times come, and so does disaster. That doesn't mean that securitization is better banished. Our banking system, like any other part of human society, has evolved, and securitization is a core part of how we move capital around the economy. But it might mean it's a good idea, in preparation for the next upswing, that we resolve that spending 2.5 times our salary on a mortgage isn't a good idea. In other words, when you go back to the bank for that second loan and you don't get it, maybe that's because you shouldn't. Questions. What do banks package loans into and sell to investors? They package them into bonds. What is this process called? It's called securitization. What do banks do with the money that they collect up front when they sell these securities? The banks use this money to make more loans. What does the idiom "fallen off a cliff" mean? It means that something has dropped straight down suddenly. In this article, what analogy is being drawn between Chernobyl and the current economic crisis? The Chernobyl nuclear disaster is being compared to the current economic crisis and securitization to radioactive waste. What does lax underwriting standard mean? It means loose lending rules. Why did the value of securitizations built on top of loans to borrowers via teaser rates and no-fee cards falter? They faltered because borrowers with less than pristine credit histories were drawn in and defaulted on their loans. According to the author, should we resolve that spending 2.5 times our salary on a mortgage or home loan is a good idea? No, we should not.